Captain Reinhardt's raised hand stayed in the air longer than necessary. Not as hesitation. As theater. Platoon, he said evenly, form up. Boots moved. Mud splashed. Men assembled into a rough line, rifles held tight not for combat, but for order. Elias remained kneeling. The wounded enemy lay beside him, breathing in shallow, broken gasps. Reinhardt turned to the platoon. Today, he announced, you will witness the cost of forgetting who we are. He looked directly at Elias. This man shows emotion over command. A pause. In war, that choice is contagious. 2 soldiers stepped forward and seized Elias by the arms, pulling him to his feet. He did not resist. The enemy soldier tried to reach for him, fingers scraping uselessly against mud. Please, the man whispered. No one translated. No one needed to. Reinhardt drew his pistol, not rushed, not angry. This is not an execution, he said. This is correction. He nodded toward the treeline. Private Bauer will be reassigned. Immediately. A murmur rippled through the platoon. Everyone knew what that meant. The forward trench. No cover. No rotations. Where reinforcements went to disappear. Elias exhaled slowly. Not fear. Relief. At least, Elias said quietly, let me finish the bandage. The captain stared at him as if seeing him for the first time. Then Reinhardt shook his head. No. He turned to a corporal. End it. The corporal hesitated just long enough for everyone to notice, then raised his rifle. A single shot rang out. The wounded enemy's body jerked once, then went still. Silence followed. Not the silence of peace. The silence of something irreversibly broken. Elias closed his eyes. The soldiers released him. Reinhardt holstered his pistol. Remember this, he said to the platoon. Mercy is a luxury the dead cannot afford. Elias was marched away. Behind him, no one spoke. Because every man there understood the lesson. Not about the enemy. But about what happens when you choose to remain human in a war that demands you stop. What are you doing, Private? The voice cut through the smoke like a blade. Elias froze, one knee in the mud, one hand pressing a blood-soaked bandage against the enemy's leg. Behind him stood Captain Reinhardt. Tall. Still. Immaculate despite the mud. A man who carried the rulebook the way others carried faith. Around the captain, 3 soldiers raised their rifles, not aimed yet, but ready. The wounded enemy whimpered. Elias stood slowly. Sir, he's unarmed, Elias said. He's bleeding out. The captain's eyes moved, not to the enemy, but to Elias's hands. The bandage. The blood. The violation. You were ordered to confirm casualties, Reinhardt said calmly. Not to play medic. Silence followed. Heavy. Judgmental. Elias swallowed. Sir, he'll die in minutes. Yes, the captain replied. That is what happens in war. One of the soldiers shifted uncomfortably. Another avoided looking at the wounded man altogether. Reinhardt stepped closer. Private Bauer, he said, lowering his voice, do you know why armies survive longer than individuals? Elias didn't answer. Because discipline outlives compassion. He gestured toward the enemy. That man would shoot you tomorrow if he could stand today. The wounded soldier coughed, blood bubbling at his lips. Reinhardt turned back to Elias. You have 2 options. The words landed like a verdict. Step away. Let nature and policy take its course. A pause. Or continue this, charity. The captain leaned in. And I will report you for aiding the enemy under fire. Elias looked down at the man on the ground. The enemy's eyes pleaded, not for victory, not for ideology, but for time. Another second of breath. Another chance to see the sun. Elias knew what the report meant. Court-martial. Prison. Or worse, reassignment to the front line where men disappeared quietly. The captain straightened. I'll ask once. Rifles clicked behind him. Step away. Elias felt the weight of every rule he had ever been taught. And the weight of the man bleeding at his feet. In war, obedience was survival. But something else older than orders refused to let go. Elias tightened his grip on the bandage. I can't, sir. For the first time, Reinhardt's expression changed. Not anger. Disappointment. So be it, he said. And raised his hand. The battlefield was quiet. Not peaceful, just empty of gunfire. Smoke still hung low over the shattered tree-line, drifting like the last breath of men who had already paid the price. Shell craters filled with rainwater reflected a gray sky that didn't seem to care who had one. Private Elias Bauer stepped forward carefully. Each boot sank into mud mixed with blood, dried, fresh, and everything in between. The fight had ended an hour ago. Or so they thought. Then he heard it. A sound so weak it almost blended into the wind. A groan. Elias froze. Training screamed at him to keep moving. Orders were clear: sweep the area. Confirm enemy casualties. Move on. But the sound came again. Closer this time. He followed it. Behind a fallen tree lay an enemy soldier, barely alive. Uniform torn. Helmet missing. One leg twisted at an angle no leg should ever be. The man's rifle was gone. His hands were empty. His eyes were wide, not with hatred, but terror. They locked eyes. For a moment, the war disappeared. No flags. No language. No sides. Just two young men who should have been anywhere else. The enemy tried to speak, but only blood came out. Elias knew the rule. Do not aid the enemy. Wounded or not. Mercy compromises discipline. If his officers saw this, there would be consequences. Severe ones. Elias knelt anyway. His hands shook as he pulled out a bandage. He told himself it was instinct. Reflex. Humanity. But deep down, he knew the truth. This was a choice. And in war, choices were never free. As he wrapped the wound, the enemy soldier gripped his sleeve, weak, desperate, like a drowning man holding onto the last thing above water. That was when Elias heard boots. Multiple pairs. Voices. Getting closer. He didn't look up. Because he already knew. The war had found him again. The trench was quiet again. Not the silence of safety. But the silence that follows when the war has taken what it came for. They cleared the bodies at dusk. Names were read. Numbers were logged. Personal items were placed into canvas bags without ceremony. When they reached the spot where Elias had stood, there was nothing to recover. No body. No identification tag. Only mud, torn fabric, and a blood-darkened bandage tangled around a shattered rifle sling. The report listed him as Private Bauer, missing in action. It was easier that way. Weeks later, the front moved. New trenches were dug over old ones. The earth swallowed memory without complaint. Captain Reinhardt survived the war. He returned home with medals he rarely wore and a uniform that never quite fit again. At night, he dreamed of hands. Hands that shook. Hands that held bandages instead of weapons. Years later, in a small church far from the front, Reinhardt stood before a simple memorial wall. Rows of names. Some with dates. Some without. He found it. Bauer, Elias. No rank. No citation. Just a name. A young man stood beside him, a veteran, judging by the way he leaned on his cane. I knew him, the man said quietly. Reinhardt didn't turn. He saved a wounded enemy once, the veteran continued. Didn't matter. War didn't forgive it. Reinhardt finally spoke. Do you think he was wrong? The man considered the question for a long time. Then he shook his head. I think, he said, he remembered something the rest of us had to forget. The church bell rang. Outside, life moved on and children laughed, carts rolled by, the world repaired itself unevenly. Reinhardt stayed where he was. Because the question didn't fade. It never would. Is mercy a crime in war? Or is it the last proof that something human survives at all? Dawn came without warmth. A pale line on the horizon, cutting through smoke and rain like a dull blade. The night attack had failed, but failure, here, didn't mean retreat. It meant retaliation. Artillery began before the sun fully rose. The earth convulsed. Sandbags burst. Men were thrown like broken tools. Elias was knocked flat, his rifle torn from his hands. When the world stopped spinning, his ears rang with a single, endless tone. Then he heard shouting. Medic! We need a medic! Ahead of him, the older soldier, the one who had understood, lay half-buried in the trench wall. Shrapnel had torn through his side. Blood soaked the mud beneath him. Elias crawled over. He knew the look. Minutes. Maybe less. The man grabbed Elias's wrist. Don't, he whispered. Save it, for someone who matters. Elias didn't answer. He tore open his kit, the same hands, the same motions as before. Bandage. Pressure. Breath held tight. The barrage intensified. Somewhere behind them, a whistle blew. Enemy infantry. Charging through the smoke. Elias looked up. Figures moved closer, dozens of them. The trench was understaffed. Outgunned. The older soldier followed Elias's gaze. Listen, he said, forcing the words out. If they break through, you stop them. Elias shook his head. I'm not leaving you. The man smiled, a tired, knowing thing. You already made your choice once, he said. Don't let it be for nothing. A grenade landed at the edge of the trench. Time slowed. Elias saw everything. The grenade. The wounded man. The advancing enemy. And the truth, clear and merciless. He could stay and they would both die. Or he could move and maybe others would live. Elias grabbed the grenade. No hesitation. He vaulted over the trench edge and ran toward the smoke. A burst of gunfire cut through the air. He felt the impact once, then again, but he kept moving. Closer. Closer. He threw the grenade. The explosion swallowed the sound of his fall. When the smoke cleared, the charge had broken. The enemy pulled back. The trench held. Hours later, medics arrived. They found survivors. They did not find Elias Bauer. Only a torn bandage and the mud, stained dark, wrapped around nothing. Captain Reinhardt read the report that evening. One line caught his eye. Enemy advance halted by single soldier action. No name. No commendation. Just a footnote. That night, Reinhardt sat alone, staring at his hands. For the first time, the rulebook felt heavier than it ever had before. Because somewhere between obedience and survival, a man had chosen mercy. And paid for it. With everything, they sent Elias to the line before nightfall. No paperwork. No speech. Just a rifle pressed back into his hands and a direction pointed with 2 fingers. Forward trench, the sergeant said. Then, quieter, try to keep your head down. The trench was little more than a wound carved into the earth. Water pooled at the bottom, cold and black. Sandbags sagged like tired shoulders. Every few minutes, distant artillery flashed brief light, delayed thunder. This was where mistakes were buried. Elias took his position. To his left, a boy who couldn't have been more than 18 stared into the dark, whispering a prayer he no longer believed would be answered. To his right, an older soldier cleaned his rifle again and again, not because it was dirty, but because his hands needed something to do. No one asked Elias why he was there. They already knew. Hours passed. Rain began to fall, light at first, then steady, soaking uniforms, weapons, skin. Somewhere ahead, in no man's land, something moved. A shadow. Then another. The boy to Elias's left stiffened. "I hear them," he whispered. Elias raised his rifle. Through the rain and darkness, figures emerged, low, cautious, human. Enemy scouts. One slipped and fell. The sound echoed louder than any gunshot. Orders came fast and sharp. Fire at will. Rifles cracked. Muzzle flashes tore holes in the night. Elias aimed, but his finger hesitated. For a fraction of a second, he saw it again. Not an enemy. A man on the ground. Bleeding. Helpless. That fraction of a second was enough. A shot rang out from the darkness. The boy beside Elias dropped without a sound. Blood sprayed across the trench wall. Elias fired. Not once. Not twice. Until the rifle clicked empty. The shadows retreated. Silence returned, heavier than before. The older soldier looked at Elias. Not with accusation. With understanding. "You wait long enough," he said quietly, "war decides for you." Elias stared at the body beside him. The boy's eyes were still open. Rain filled them slowly. In that trench, Elias finally understood the truth Reinhardt never said aloud. Mercy wasn't punished because it was weak. It was punished because it reminded others of what they had lost. And the war was not done collecting payment.